Okay, go now.
Hi, everybody. This is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman. This is our sixth call on the emergency coronavirus election protection group. We've been meeting and constantly to basically outline the critical information about protecting the upcoming vote. This group is actually, well, I guess that's the name, the Emergency Election Protection Zoom group. We have joined by two of our senior advisors. Jennifer Roberts is going to talk to us about her upcoming Zoom call tomorrow in North Carolina, the first statewide call. Our senior advisor, Bob Petrakis, is going to talk to them about the upcoming organization in Ohio. Bob is also going to talk about the ability of groups to work with him on fundraising and handling the money if you raise it. This is not a fundraising call, in contradiction to most things you're getting these days. And Steve Rosenfeld will be on towards the end to talk about latest developments. And but we're going to start. And like I say, the primary focus of these calls is to offer ongoing information and clarification on protecting the election in November, and on building a network of people who are committed to protecting the election. We're very favorable towards vote by mail, and we want people in every state and in every county to understand everything that's going on with the election, especially in their locale, so that it can be protected. And I have just put out a piece. It's at Reader Supported News, 20 different points about vote by mail, which is probably going to be, well, almost certainly will be the bulk of the upcoming election. Will be done on vote by mail. As Ray Lutz has pointed out, it gives us paper ballots, which is something that we've been working for more than a decade, certainly since Florida 2000, that as many of the votes as possible in this upcoming election will be on paper. We understand that there will be folks with special needs who will be using electronic machines at voting stations, but the vast majority of the votes will be on vote by mail, and we need people in every state and in every county to have a total grasp on what's going on. Towards that end, we're hoping to set up or coordinate with coordinators in every state. Bob Petrakis is doing that in Ohio, Jennifer in North Carolina, John Brakey in Arizona. And as I mentioned, Jennifer will be conducting the first statewide Zoom call in North Carolina tomorrow. And if you want to write in and see if you can get the detail, you can write to me at solartopia@gmail.com, and I'll pass the request on to Jennifer. So we want to start now. We're with the great Alan Minsky, who is the executive director of PDA. They're right in sync on this whole project with the same kind of mission here. And Alan, we had a very positive conversation earlier. So tell us what's going on with vote by mail and with PDA.
Well, I think the way that the real asset that PDA can bring to this, right, and to so many of the projects that relate to a national election, and of course our elections are, even when the one national election is our 51 separate elections, is the fact that we have chapters and activist members across the country. So, as I said, I might need to get a drink of water. Going from Zoom call to Zoom call. Let's see if I can hold out for a second. So as I spoke with Harvey earlier today, in that conversation, the sort of concept about how this can operate and how PDA can play a really clear and concrete role in this, even beyond what Mimi Kennedy and Steve Rosenfeld, and I see Emily Levy on the call, and we'll be working with Emily's organization as well. You know, there's the digital operation, and then there's the fact of people on the ground. Excuse me, Dorothy?
Go ahead.
Okay. When we're talking about county by county in all the states and in the swing states, having people who are on the ground who can really anchor the distribution of the information is an asset that I think PDA can bring to what we're building here. And when you were actually looking, and this is something that only really dawned on me when I was talking to Harvey, when you're looking at the swing states, and you're looking at the top line swing states, and Harvey's identified the top 6 as Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, North Carolina, and Florida. Lo and behold, PDA is remarkably strong in a number of those states. My reading of the electoral map is that if you were really to even go deeper into it, Wisconsin and Arizona are really where the Democrats and Joe Biden can secure a victory against Donald Trump. Biden, of course, is from Pennsylvania, which should help him there. Michigan hasn't been as red as Wisconsin has in recent years. And the Democrats have been doing a little better, and the current governor is popular, et cetera. But I don't know if people have done the math, but if you get to where Biden picks up Michigan and Pennsylvania from Trump, but Trump wins Wisconsin and Arizona, it's 268 to 268.
Well, that would be exciting.
That would be terrible. And it comes down then to Nebraska and Maine. And I'll get to those places in a minute, because actually, Harvey, you know, it really should be 6.2 at the top, okay? I'll get to that in a second. But in those states, first of all, Arizona is probably PDA's single strongest state. Not
So,
only,
Alan, let me jump in. When you say it's your strongest state, what do you mean? Do you have people on the ground there? Are there people on your mailing list? How many people are on your mailing list, and how many would you think would be in those states?
we have a really large mailing list all over the place. The difference in Arizona is that, I mean, they simply are a present political force within the state and within the Democratic Party that's more heightened and more active and more, I think, spoken about within the dynamics of Arizona Democratic Party politics than any other state in the country. So they're considered a very vibrant group. We have, for instance, the somewhat of a young American activist superstar by the name of Bella Encisa is a PDA member from Arizona. She was Bernie Sanders' communications, well, sort of second communications director under Breonna Joy Gray. She was organizing the Latino outreach. And of course, as you probably know, Bernie Sanders did spectacularly well among Latino voters in the primaries. So that Arizona is a big anchor, in fact, for what worked so well moving forward for the Sanders campaign in terms of Latino outreach. And,
so do you have, Alan, let me jump in. Do you have people in Arizona who could coordinate
yes.
county by county? So we have John Brakey on the phone.
They could probably do, they're so big in many places, they could do precinct by precinct. But yes, county by county is easy, yeah.
So if you can continue to give us updates on how that's being done, that is the nationwide model that we're looking at. County by county, even precinct by precinct, people who are active and who know everything that's going on with the election.
Okay, but then going forward, even on your list, and I sort of question Florida's inclusion, but as we know, and people who know PDA, Florida, of course, is a nightmare in terms of elections, but also anybody who knows PDA is Florida is certainly in our top 5 states of influence. Mike Fox is worth 100 people by himself. I don't really know how much energy we want to put into Florida relative to the other states on the top list, because I do think it is a hall of mirrors, but, and certainly the Florida PDA activists will concur with that as far as I understand. And Harvey and I talked about that earlier. Okay, so we're very good in Western Pennsylvania and very networked, not so much in Eastern Pennsylvania, but when we're talking about needing to get the word out about how all of the states voting is working and getting people mobilized when these states are razor thin margins, you know, having half of a large state is a huge deal. It's not like we're void of contacts in the east of Pennsylvania. In North Carolina, traditionally PDA hasn't been that strong, but a certain guy named Joel Siegel moved back down there from Washington a while ago, and he seems to know a few folks in North Carolina and be pretty networked. And damn magnetic guy, that Siegel. And so I think we can, as PDA takes on this coordinating project and focusing on the swing states, we'll bring our organization from Arizona, share it with Joel, and Joel can share what he's learning from North Carolina to Arizona, the whole network Joel has. So certainly
Right.
PDA is happy to help anchor.
So one of our, you mentioned North Carolina, Jennifer Roberts, who's on the phone, on the call, and we're going to talk to her. You'll be gone, but it has a Zoom call tomorrow. It's the first that we know of statewide Zoom call. So one of our goals is chief goal is to have these Zoom calls in every state so that people can discuss their governor, the election boards, the key counties, and how it looks for election protection in these states. Can you tell us real quickly, because not everybody in the call maybe know, tell us a bit about PDA, who you are and what you do, and why you would have this kind of network available on a state-by-state basis.
Yeah, here's how I describe PDA when people ask me about it. And, the truth of it is the PDA became a very important organization in the left wing of the Democratic Party when the left wing of the Democratic Party nationally was very weak, okay? Howard Dean had gained some momentum in 2004 talking about he was running as the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. That was one of his catchphrases. Well, sort of. And PDA actually came out of the Kucinich campaign and some of the left wing of the Dean campaign of that election cycle, 2004. For the next decade, and I know it's a little hard to get a grip on because we've all lived through now 2 cycles of Sanders campaigns, and there's been a transformation in the role of progressives in the Democratic Party, but the progressives were pretty marginalized in so many places within the Democratic Party. If you just look at what progressives are now in 2020 understood to stand for, the Sanders agenda, as Sanders was never shy to say, these things were considered too radical. And basically,
so what do you have
the
now?
PDA base always supported those policies, always supported Medicare for all, always supported. Now, the reason that maybe more people don't know about PDA is that the absolute moment of its greatest impact, which was we were the sole national organization to call upon Bernie Sanders to run for president as a Democrat. And there's a backstory as to why we did that, as opposed to Elizabeth Warren, when all the other progressive organizations were trying to draft Warren, has a lot to do with the fact that the executive director lived in Massachusetts. We're very strong in Massachusetts. They knew Warren's people well. So they knew that she wasn't going to run. We went out, drafted Sanders, and the only group to do it, but we had a very, very brilliant and dynamic executive director who was the person that when people spoke about PDA nationally, they thought almost singularly of Tim Carpenter. There was a very strong association of the organization with the person, and Tim Carpenter died in 2014. He was sick for quite a while.
You have a network now of what, 20, 30, 40,000 people? And
well, no, but it's even better than that. It's larger than that, and it's better than that. And the reason it's better than that is because, okay, so who did Tim organize in the period between 2004 and 2014? What I've learned since I've been ED now for over a year and a half is that in so many states, he was picking up people who were fighting the good fight when so few people were inside the party. So a number of, for instance, progressive caucuses around the country were started by PDAers. I see Dorothy Reich here, of course. The role that PDA played in California completely lifted the profile of progressives in the party to a great point of influence before, Bernie Sanders runs or anything like, before the market crashed in the Bush-Cheney era. And it had a big influence on the party there. So we were a prominent organization when progressives were marginal. Unfortunately, a tragedy struck when we really could have been lifted up into even greater prominence. But we're still a pretty big player. We're in all the group meetings with all the newer progressive organizations that have come in the wake of the Sanders campaign. And I think the good point there too is we're really a cooperative agent for those organizations. There's often infighting on the left and from organization to organization, we can look out at this organization that doesn't get along with that organization, and we have good relationships with both of them. And that's continuing through to the day. Yeah.
Joel Siegel has asked, has asked to jump in there. Joel, did you want to say something? Joel Siegel? Joel? Okay, go ahead then. Alan.
Yeah, I think you can go now.
Oh yeah, there you are. Okay, Joel, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I like Alan's Jufro.
Oh yeah. I hadn't shaved until a few days ago. I look really scruffy.
Well, it looks,
Okay.
I wish I had a Jufro. I don't have one anymore. But anyway, let me tell you something. I want you to mark your watches. It's 5:20 today. You know, we just had a major breakthrough. This is confidential, what I'm gonna tell everybody. Well, I'm gonna put it this way. I just had a call with one of the highest level operatives in the Democratic Party, in the progressive wing, who must remain nameless. This is absolutely one of the most influential, you know, senior leaders within the Democratic Party, who I've known for 20 years, who wants to work with us. And what I told this person is that unless we can raise the $20 million and get 50,000 people to the polls like the Republican Party is doing to suppress the vote, this could be very, very, very challenging to get Democrats elected. And then she mentioned Russian interference and the same fears that I have, Alan, about militias like in North Carolina coming to the polls, and they already are doing that, like they have Confederate flags. This is our first real, you know, face-to-face, you know, meeting with the far authoritarian right wing, of which we've never seen before. Before they used to hide it. Now they're just being right wing with lawsuits in Texas on voter suppression. So the question I have, Alan, is how do we get the entire PDA base? How do we get our revolution? How do we get the key progressive organizations that you have worked with over the years to really begin a very emergency conversation on a freedom like summer? That's what we have to do. And, you know, I just saw James Fukuda from LULAC. He's the state chapter of New Jersey. LULAC is all over the country, but we're going to have some kind of a way for a strategy session. This includes Fair Fight. And I'm going to call Reverend Gerald Durley.
All right, Fair Fight is Stacey Abrams.
Yeah.
So one of the things, Paul, Alan, one of the things.
I'm finished.
Oh, you got it? You want to go? No?
No, I'm finished. Yeah, I'm finished.
One of the things, Alan, that we hope, and you're the first group, we're going to be doing groups on like yours, and also Emily is going to talk about Scrutineers, which is an information center, and Paul, Bob Trakers will chime in on that because the Free Press is going to be available also for that. But the question is, we want to bring together all the groups that are working. For example, on election protection, I got an email today, a fundraising appeal, of course, from a group affiliated with Move On, which I never heard before. Now, they don't say what they're doing. So all these groups are putting out fundraising appeals saying help protect the vote, but they don't say what they're doing. So our clear formula, and PDA seems to be the perfect group for this because you're so grassroots oriented, and Joel has talked to LULAC and other ethnic-based groups, is to make it clear that what our goal is here is the people on the state and county and precinct level have to understand everything that's going on in that area with the election. So that when push comes to shove, you know, we're not talking vague specifics here. We're not advocating, you know, major reforms. We're talking specifically about getting the vote out and getting it back in and getting it counted in each precinct.
Yes, and of course, look, and there's no, yeah, look, Harvey asked me to be enthusiastic, and I am enthusiastic, but of course we have very tricky circumstances. We have, obviously, with the conventional sense of how one achieves registration, and let's say we're fully cognizant of each state's registration deadlines, and we're talking obviously November election now, not the primaries anymore. Each state's registration deadline, and than the particularities about how the vote will take place in every county. Let's say we have all that information, we get it out. Conventionally, this would involve some kind of public events and even, you know, going door to door. That may not be an option in 2020. It probably won't be an option. And so we have to adjust to that. And you know, therein, we're working with some people who are very tech savvy. We haven't been that organization ourselves, and maybe some of the other organizations on here have been, you know, have a greater reach. There's a real risk in relying on you know, everything that's online and digital. But we have to use every instrument we have. And to me, you know, we should go about this as a classical informational drive to get people registered, to have them understand the high stakes and the unique context of the 2020 election, and then to insulate and to give the information to everybody about how to vote in their county, and then what the risks are on the ways that there are risks. You know all about, and Mimi Kennedy knows all about voting machines and so on. If that's an issue in a district, what's the safest way to vote? So we get all the information on all the electoral planes. And, you know, this is something that I know Emily works on nonstop and with the scrutineers, and that Mimi Kennedy and Steve Rosenfeld, who's on the call, are going to work in coordination with PDA. But the real thing that Harvey asked me about for this call was the question of PDA as an anchor organization to help get the information out with bodies on the ground in the areas. And that we have. I mean, certainly there are places where we're stronger than we are, and other places we're weaker. James Fukuda and I talked a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that's quirky is I've always been tiny in New York State, because Tim Carpenter made the decision to cede New York to Working Families Party back in the day. So that's one of the biggest voids in the country, which is weird for a progressive organization. So there are places we're weak and there are places we're strong. But strangely, in many of the most important swing states, we're very strong.
Good.
So,
Good.
Alan, about the situation in Florida. You didn't flesh out Florida very well, Alan, and with 25
Right.
electoral votes, the whole election may pivot on Florida. I don't mean to pressure you here, but can you give us a better idea about Florida?
Please.
Well, I mean, again, first of all, I was a little surprised. Yeah, no, I mean, I suppose it belongs in the top 6. The way I see it, and I think it's the most ridiculous electoral system in the world.
Yeah.
But, you know, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina and Arizona would be the top 5, with Florida competing for 6th, if we're just going to be strictly tactical.
Florida is such a nightmare. I mean, the question is, can we get people, when you say people, bodies on the ground, people inside, can we get people inside the election apparatus in the counties and the states?
Well, okay, here's the thing. Okay, Florida and Ohio, and of course Harvey has from Ohio so much of his adult life, and we got great allies there, Bob Petrakis, and of course PDA came out of the Kucinich campaign, so we got some pretty strong connections there as well. But you know, more in Cleveland and Columbus than in Cincinnati, and but anyway, you know. So in Florida, yes, of course, PDA activists have experiences, as any person who addresses Florida politics does, with the nightmare of counting votes and having honest elections in the state of Florida. And so in some respects, it's been a state where there's been a lot of work done there, is my impression, without a lot of progress. So it seems like it's a kind of signature point of frustration to maybe.
Put the ball back in Trump's case. If the Democrats take Florida, then it's up to Trump to actually win the election.
I understand.
Well,
I'm not saying we have people down there, and we'll anchor in Florida in the way that we do all across the place, but all across the country. But I think to have the activists in the other 5 states, I think of the states that are at the top 5 that I listed, really only in Wisconsin and North Carolina, with Moral Mondays, has there been a real focus on this. So in
Let me-
Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, we'd really be lifting the consciousness of the public on this issue because it hasn't been as much of a focus. That's all I'm saying,
so
Steve.
the big focus, thank you, Steve. The big focus is going to be on protecting the vote in all these states. You know, Emily, I wanted you to meet Jennifer. Jennifer Roberts, can you come on quickly while Alan is on? And I'm sure everybody interested, if you can discuss the Zoom call you're going to do in North Carolina tomorrow and
Sure.
how you set it up, that would be really good to hear.
Sure. Well, and just to clarify, I didn't do it personally. It's a group called Common Cause.
Oh, yeah.
And I put in the chat the information and the link to register. They're going to have the national president of Common Cause. They're also going to have a Wisconsin representative from Common Cause and the head of Common Cause here in North Carolina. And the interesting thing is, you know, talk about groups that are willing to do something. They filed a lawsuit. And it's a compelling lawsuit because it says that, you know, voting is a constitutional right, but in the time of COVID, people are not protected and not able to vote. And it's your responsibility to make it possible for them to do so. So they want to do things like eliminate the requirement for 2 signatures on a mail-in ballot because in a time of COVID, you can't get 2 signatures safely. They want to eliminate the 25-day ahead of time requirement for registering and some other things, just again, to make it safe and make it accessible. So they filed a lawsuit. There are other groups that join them, League of Women Voters, Democracy NC, several others are joining in. But we don't know, we have no idea if the courts are going to move that forward. The court docket is so bizarre these days with cancellations, et cetera, because of COVID. So, but they also have hired somebody here in Charlotte who is a graduate of our HBCU, Johnson C. Smith University, and she's doing community outreach. And she's doing it through Zoom and phone calls, et cetera. But they are organizing to really focus on the parts of the state that need that outreach, that have been traditionally, historically excluded, racially segregated, and to make the case for why people need to vote. We have a gazillion reasons here in North Carolina that people need to vote. We're one of the states that has not expanded Medicaid. And so we have 500,000 people who have no access to health care, just for a start. But we do have a Democratic governor, and I know we've been in the news of late because of the whole question about whether or not we can have the Republican National Convention here, because we actually want to do things that are safe and healthy. So Common Cause is the group here. As many folks who want to join on Tuesday, please join that because they'll have the national president. I don't know how many states that they're in, but they obviously are very grassroots oriented. They're getting out, they're educating people, and they're educating, they're filing lawsuits, and they're lobbying lawmakers. So it's a terrific group to be part of. I'm sure other folks have worked with them as well, and I'm sure they'd be happy to work with PDA. And we also have a vote writers representative here in North Carolina, Pam. I don't know if Pam's on the line, but they're helping people get documentation. We don't have our voter ID laws in the courts right now too, and it's temporarily not required, but we have no idea if by November it will be. So they're helping people get IDs, helping folks, have documentation challenges. Older people who don't know how to use the internet, it's hard to get a replacement driver's license. I mean, it's amazing how hard they're making it to vote. So, so that's my quick update from North Carolina, the infamous home of North Carolina 9, where we had election fraud and had to redo an election because it was so egregious. Even the Republicans figured that it was time to redo it.
So your Zoom call tomorrow is at what time?
It's at 5 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay, so people looking for a model, and Alan, if you can't, maybe other folks from PDA can listen in on that call and get an idea, and Bob in Ohio, John in Arizona, as to how these calls need to go. Joel Siegel, you want to jump in real quick? I can't hear you. Can't hear you. You're
I've been muted.
There, okay. Yeah. You muted again, hold on.
He's muted.
There.
Am I good?
Yeah,
By the way, hey, Jennifer, and is Alan still on?
yes, Alan's on.
Yeah, so I think probably one of the single most important organizations is Our Revolution. So the question that I had to Alan is, how do we bring them into this? Because they could raise millions of dollars, and we need money to hire organizers. They've got Bernie, who can use his Nina Turner. They've just got this incredible, robust, organization on the ground, leaders. We're going to have students. That's the question I have: is how do we bring in Our Revolution? And then if you look at the chat, I see Next Gen, who I work with. Next Gen folks pretty carefully. Pretty closely, but this should not be that hard. Everyone knows we're dealing with fascism, but we have to have a mechanism where we can bring all these groups together for this very important conversation. So I think maybe PDA can maybe host this, or PDA and us, but we have to do it pretty fast.
Alan? You're muted. He's muted.
Mute land.
PDA has an official partnership with Our Revolution. It was true that was put in place with the previous Our Revolution team before they went into the Sanders campaign, but I work closely with the current team with Joseph and Paco and Larry. We're partners in one project that launched last week called the Bernie Delegates Network, and I'll be on a call with Joseph and Larry tomorrow. That's Larry Cohen. So we work very closely. However, in saying that, I can't declare that they'll join us in this. They decide what they prioritize. So it is a matter of us bringing a presentation to them. I certainly think we can rely on, we can always go into any Our Revolution meeting, get on the agenda. We're partners with them officially, explain what we're doing. At the least, we can do that with any Our Revolution chapter. But we're not, and we're in really good standing with Larry and Joseph and the whole team over there. They have a little bit of a different relationship. They're national to their locals right now. Yeah, they're really good players, and they got a lot of people, and they'd be a great asset.
So Joel, I know you, we've posted in the chat, Dr. Paul has posted the link to Jennifer's, the North Carolina Zoom call tomorrow. I encourage people to listen in. Is there anyone, real quick, Alan has to leave, that has a...
Yeah, I have a question. I'm a journalist.
Okay, real quick.
Are you, what are normally in elections over election protection, very close to November, a number of major groups get together under Our Vote or whatever. Are you working with the normal either Democrat or civil rights community work on election protection on the ground? And how would your work that you're trying to coalesce work with other organizations, and often sometimes that work on election protection during the election cycle? In other words, there's usually some efforts to have like lawyers on the ground and all that. I'm just wondering what your effort not in terms of vote by mail, but in terms of the getting inside the election administration, make sure it's working and so on. In terms of existing organizations, how are you working with them?
It's a question directed to PDA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, one of the things the PDA was very focused upon, I'm going to have to leave when I get a call. I have to do a radio interview. It was scheduled for 40 minutes after the hour. I apologize. It'll be an abrupt.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No. Let me
No,
answer.
go ahead. Just answer
Dr. Bill is still on the call, and he's a PDA staff member. And again, PDA has, like any organization, had its particular issues that it was focused on to a greater or lesser degree. And one of them for us has been election protection, with actually a real singular focus upon the trustworthiness of the machinery involved. And that's due to the actress Mimi Kennedy, who's been a core PDA member. I don't know if people are familiar with her as an actress. She's currently on the TV show Mom. And she's very active on that particular issue with that particular framing. Because of that, someone like Mimi, for instance, knows all of the studies, all of the lawyers, all of the cases that have been brought to challenge and stuff like that. Now, of course, on the broader civil rights effort to protect people's rights to vote, I think, so I have to be quick because I might get called in a second, to summarize what we're, I think, going to be, what we're committing to be available to do is what we were already doing with Mimi and Steve Rosenfeld in coordination with Emily, to use our network to get the information to be as clear as possible. Now we're going to have to coordinate. That was the call. I got to go in a second. I just missed the call. You know, one of the things is because of the local chapters, we should, if they're anchoring the regional effort to get the information out as PDA activists and chapters, we should make it an obligation that they get up to speed, because this is 51 elections, and then there's the federal laws too. The state of the laws and the legal challenges in their district. So it's a great question, Art, and super important that we are up to speed on it wherever we engage this. I really apologize, obviously.
I know, thank you, Alan, thank you. We're gonna move on, thank you, Alan. We look forward to working with you. Your PDA is gonna be key to protecting this election. There's no doubt about it. Absolutely. Okay, we have Emily Emily Levy, and also Bob Fitrakis. Emily runs Scrutineers, and I'm sure you'll post the link, Emily, in the chat. And Bob Fitrakis runs the Columbus Free Press, freepress.org, and both are serving as information repositories. We'll start with Emily. Can you tell us about Scrutineers and how people can use your website to do what needs to be done? Let's put it that way. Emily Levy?
I was muted, forgot about that.
There you go. Okay.
So yes, I absolutely can do that. And thank you for the opportunity for inviting me to do this today. And actually being an information repository is a tiny piece of what we are doing at Scrutineers. So I want to give you a little bit of the context, and what we're creating is something that's, as far as I can tell, very different from anything else that's out there. And that means it takes some actual focus to understand what it is and how you can use it. So I'm really glad to have the opportunity to share this with you today. I've been involved in the election protection movement, as many of you have, since 2004, and I've worked with a bunch of different organizations in many states, most of that work being done from my home in California. And I realized that as we were heading into this election cycle, that there were some really big gaps that I saw that needed to be filled. And I want to outline briefly what they were, because it'll help you understand why Scrutineers is the combination of things that it is. So one thing was that when it came to the election security part of election protection, as distinct from the voting rights part, there really hasn't been a movement. There have been a bunch of different small organizations that are really good at the in-the-weeds technical stuff, at figuring out what needs to be done, but haven't been able to do it on a really large scale because they don't have enough people to do it. At the same time, there are all these people in the country who are freaked out about the election and want to help and have no idea that there's anything that they could do that would matter. And I wanted to bring those two groups of people together to create a movement where there's the folks who know what need to be done as part of it, including many of you, and the folks who can do it in many places, all together in one place. I saw that there wasn't enough collaboration happening between the people working on election security and people working on voting rights. And I think there's some key reasons that that's true, and that it absolutely needed to change for this year. And I'm thrilled to see that that is changing. And I think that gives me more hope than just about anything these days. It hasn't changed enough yet, but it is changing. And then one of the things that we've, I think, struggled with in the election security advocacy movement is that there's a certain amount of somewhat technical information that people need to understand in order to be helpful election monitors or volunteers for our organization. And there hasn't been a place for people who are new to the issue excuse me, to go to learn that stuff. And those of us running small organizations don't have the time or energy or sometimes the skill set to teach those new people, to explain the technical stuff in ways that people can understand who don't have a technical background. So we needed to have kind of a way, somewhere that people could go and learn the basic stuff and then volunteer with whatever group they wanted to volunteer with. And then finally, at least among the folks that I've been in communication with all these years, the main ways that we were communicating with each other in a group setting, as beyond one-to-one conversations, is either in Facebook groups where people are afraid to post anything real because they don't trust Facebook with good reason, or in giant BCC or CC email chains that clog up our inboxes, make it impossible to find what we need. We can't stop getting emails about something, and we just needed a place to be able to communicate better. So all of those things are what inspired the creation of Scrutineers. And the name of it actually, that scrutineer is a term that means election monitor and investigator in other countries. And I'm bringing that term to the United States. So we are a nonpartisan group. We started in January. We have a little over 100 members so far. I want to grow to 10,000 by the general election. Our advisory committee at this point is Andrea Miller, who spoke on last week's call, and Benny Smith, who some of you may know from Memphis, who's, if you know the term fraction magic, that's associated, he's the person that figured that out, and Jan Bendor from Michigan, who's a former election official and really strong advocate for election protection. And our fiscal sponsor is Concentric Media. So we're not yet a 501c3, but we're operating under those restrictions because we want to become one sometime after the election. So what Scrutineers is, if you go to the homepage, all you will see is a one-page website that has a button on it that unfortunately says choose a plan, because it's not, the platform we're working on doesn't let us decide what's on that button. So unfortunately, that's what it says. 98% of what Scrutineers is inside there. It's a membership site. So you can't actually see it unless you join. And to join costs a one-time fee of $1.99. And I know that seems really odd that there is a fee, and the reason is to keep bots out. And also, if somebody comes in to make trouble, we have more ability to trace who they are because they had to put down a debit card or credit card. So, so that's why it costs money to join. What it is really, I think the best way to, well, we have individual memberships, which you can do from the website, and organizational memberships. For individuals, it's a place to come to learn about the issues, to get trained, to read up on resources, to connect with other people who are working on what you want to work on, and then to figure out what needs to be done and to take action. For organizations, it's somewhat more complicated to understand. And I think the best analogy is that it is an online co-working space for the election protection movement. So in some ways, what we've created is a container for you to come in and do the work that you're doing, connect with each other, share resources. So you don't, like in a regular co-working space, you would have your own little office, but then there's a shared conference room and a shared coffee pot and shared AV equipment. And so in this context, there are discussion boards that are for the whole community. And if your organization joins, you also can have your own private discussion area that's for the people that work with your organization. There are events that are for the whole Scrutineers community. And if your organization has your own, we call it a circle, but a subgroup, then you can have your own events for your members or your team, however you want to use your circle. That's kind of like—
Emily, your site is focused on election protection issues.
Yes.
So you're expecting people to come and go through your site and to exchange information and to post information and to lead people to each other and to other issues and organizations relating to election protection.
It's all relating to election protection.
Right.
So the idea is is that it's a place that we can come together and be a community, and there's also sections of it where you can do the work of your organization in some ways on the site using our tools, like the discussion boards, private messaging, things like that.
Okay, so Deborah Cohn has just texted here that she's joined just joined Scrutineers. So you've made a good sales pitch here. Dorothy Reich has just texted, by the way, that Twitter is starting to fact check Trump's tweets. They'll probably have to like 6 people to do that, but
I think that's a low estimate, Sluggo.
Yeah. So Emily, this is really great, and you've got Scrutineers.org posted here in the chat section.
Yeah. So can I finish up? I'm almost done.
Please, yes, please.
Okay. And then you said that we could have time for some questions. So
yeah.
So we also just launched a podcast in collaboration with the nonprofit news site whowhatwhy.org, which does a really good job of covering election protection issues. And a big part of the reason for that podcast is to help connect the voting rights and election security movements by having leaders from different organizations come onto the podcast. And so thanks, Shel. It's wonderful that you're here, my friend Shel Horowitz. So in general, it's not really Scrutineers' main purpose to take on projects and do them, but to amplify the work that you're doing and provide tools to help you do the work that you're doing. And I have an 18-minute video that's goes into more detail about what organizational members get that you can see if you join as an individual, or if you want me to send you the link to it, let me know and I will. But that said, there is a project we really want to do that's related very much to things that have been talked about here today, which is getting, which is a local project for people to participate in, either in their local area or in another local area that's not where they live, but that they choose to focus on. I really believe that whoever is declared the loser of the presidential election this year is likely to challenge the election, and that we very well may have a situation where local election officials are called upon to prove that their the election results that they have certified are correct. And the way things are right now, they won't be able to do that. And I think that if we begin building relationships with local election officials now and say that to them and say, we can help you be able to document that the election results are correct, and there's some ways that our movement has developed to do that, that we may be able to really change the relationship that our movement has with election departments and really have an impact. So we are wanting to take that project on. We don't yet have, for that to happen, we need to have more contribution from some of you to train people in the specific things that you're experts in. So if that appeals to you, you could reach out to me at emily@scrutineers.org. And one of the things is, because we're new and just getting started, anybody who hasn't quite found their place yet in how they can make a contribution and has some skills in this area, there's tons of stuff that we have that you could do that could really be impactful. And I'd love to have all of you inside and participating.
Wonderful.
So thank you.
Lynn Bernstein has sent a note here that it's proving difficult in North Carolina to bridge the gap between groups focused on voter suppression and election security. The voter suppression groups don't want to talk about election security because they think it will discourage people from voting. And Bob and I and Steve and other people who've been writing about election security issues are continually told, shush, because won't want people to vote. What do you think?
This particular thing has been going on for a really long time, and it's a lot why, people say, why aren't you working more with the Democratic Party? We're a nonpartisan organization, so we can't really do that exactly, but the Democratic Party has absolutely taken that position historically, that if we talk about election security, people aren't going to vote. And this year, I think that more than ever, it's clear that we absolutely have to flood the elections with votes in order to override the election security concerns. So I think if that's part of our messaging, that begins to be part of the answer to that question. And it's something I honestly also get stuck on and would love to have a longer conversation about it. I don't have a pat answer to it. If there was a pat answer, you would have heard it by now.
I have a pat answer. The pat answer is that you have to 100% look at election security or it doesn't make any sense at all. The idea that, and the Democrats—
That's not going to satisfy the people who have that concern.
I understand, but I personally, I just think they're wrong. I mean, you know, Bob and I uncovered stuff in Ohio. It was absolutely terrifying. And we continually talk about the Democrats, even though there were Democrats who were leaking this stuff to us, and Bob used to jump on and unmute. You know, we were continually told, shush, don't talk about election votes being stolen because then people won't come out to vote. I mean, come on. It's insane. You have to deal with both issues. It's outrageous. To me, it's outrageous. You have to expose—
I want to hear what Lynn was going to say. So Lynn's the person who brought this up. Yeah.
Please.
So, for instance, tomorrow they're having Common Cause and Democracy NC and many organizations are having this day of action to sort of piggyback on the legislators putting forth a new bill on election law. I'm noticing that one of the groups on that list, Advance Carolina, that one of their board members also happens to be an ES&S lobbyist. And so I feel like some of these groups really need to be more careful about who they're putting on there, because people like me who are writing and calling and pleading with them to do, to ask for very basic things like access to the Board of Elections on election night, and don't let the boards of elections print their poll tapes at 3 p.m. on election day for early voting machines. And they open their ballots, they approve absentee ballots, they open them, then they secure them in a location for a week before they run them through the tabulators. And so they don't want to address any of these issues that are pretty basic for chain of custody. And, you know, I'm not an investigator, but I was easily able to find the ES&S lobbyist. And so it just seems like some of these groups that kind of suck all of the air and take up so many volunteers, they're not really, I feel like they really squash our message that is a pretty common sense message of election security.
So, Lynn, I think that, you know, that this issue of if we tell people about problems with election security, it'll scare them away from voting, is really kind of a tired argument that has been nullified to a great extent by the exposure of the Russian interference into the 2016 election. And it may be that leaders of organizations haven't figured out that the equation is different now because of that, but the voters have.
Yes, I mean, they're not fooling anybody. Bob Fitrakis, you know, in 2004, we were being fed information from inside the Democratic Party, who would then renounce that information because we're getting the information at night, and in the daytime, the Democrats would come out and deny it all. I mean, it makes no sense. You have to be totally, in my opinion, and one of the reasons we're on a call like this is you have to be totally open about everything that's happening with an election. I mean, the public has to know that in addition to voter suppression, there's also election theft. And one of the reasons that we have embraced vote by mail, as someone has already mentioned on the call, is that it gets us to paper ballots, which is a nonpartisan issue. But by the way, I just got a little note that President Obama has publicly endorsed universal vote by mail. And the key reason, as far as one of the key reasons, the top reason we endorse vote by mail is because it gets us to paper ballots, which, you know, you as scrutineers are very well aware of. Bob Fitrakis, you on the line? Bob?
Yes,
yes, there you are.
I'm here.
Okay, so Bob, I'm bringing you in. Emily, people can send information to you, and you will post it at Scrutineers, but you're in an organized
People
fashion.
who have stuff they want posted at Scrutineers should understand what it is first and reach out to me, and because it's not a clear yes, partly because if people send us a ton of stuff, we don't have the person power right now to promise to post it all. So so if you want to use Scrutineers as a way to get information out, please contact me and we'll talk about what makes sense.
Hi, I've got a question for you and others on the call. Is there something that either your group, which is very small and new, or others have developed that can be used by individual citizens and individual community activists now regarding both questions about where they stand on getting equipment and being able to handle vote by mail, specific questions both on vote by mail readiness and election security readiness that could be widely circulated both to individuals who want to get involved and link up with community activists, because you guys at the top end are trying to organize across the board. I'm just saying, is there something that can be used on the ground now, and provide info about specifics, maybe through links, but generic questions about vote by mail readiness for county election boards and election security issues that could be brought forward by individual activists or local community groups?
Okay, so Bob and I you saw probably the piece I put out, 20 ways to protect vote by mail.
Right, okay.
And then, which was originally posted at Reader Supported News.
Okay.
And then Bob and I have written 6 or 7 books, and 1 or 2 with Steve Rosenfeld on what happened in these various elections. Now, what you're asking for is a little more specific.
Not a huge volume. I'm just saying, is there like a handy checklist of things that local activists and local groups could use to go to their county election boards and say, where do you stand on having, for instance,
Right.
if you're on having equipment necessary to process.
That's exactly what we want to create, Art. That's exactly what we want to create, and
Yeah.
we need some help to do it. So if people
Okay.
want to work with us on creating that kit, I'd love to hear from you.
And the purpose in that vote by mail article was to do just that for vote by mail. It could be a checklist. Maybe I missed a couple things, but that's what that purpose is. John Brakey has been working on the electronic ballot imaging, which is the way we hope that the vote by mail ballots will be counted. And John, you've said, you want to unmute John, Bob, stay with us, that 80% of the precincts in the country have this machine?
It's, if it was just plain the way it's going on, voting at a precinct's about 80%. But if we were to go nationally, vote by mail, it would all be, for the most part, digital, except for a few small states like New Hampshire, Vermont. The rest of the country is pretty much shifted. I would say 96 to 97% of all votes would be counted on hand-marked paper ballots with a digital image made, because these machines don't count the ballot, they count the image, and redundancy is a good thing. But first off, the hand-marked paper ballot is the most important record. And
right, so Emily and
protect each other.
Emily and Art, John knows everything about these machines. And Emily, you should probably interview John for Scrutineers about the digital balloting, the digital vote count system. So
Absolutely. We already have Audit USA's guide in Scrutineers, which I actually wrote. So I worked with John for a couple of years on.
Oh, all right, good. There you go.
And that's absolutely one of the things we want to have happen. And I think that in terms, I don't know if everyone on this call is familiar with the concept of digital ballot images, and that's something we will get to on a different call here and also in Scrutineers, but it is a way that people from home can count the votes. And given that it's going to be hard for us to get into election offices to monitor after this election, it's a great opportunity for us to really advance this idea of, fine, we won't come monitor. we still want to come monitor some stuff that happens in the election office, but let us see the ballot images and we're going to try to verify the vote count using those. It's not
Right,
a
so
full
let's go
audit, but
into-
it's a step of the audit
Let's
process.
go into detail next week. In next week's call, John and Emily and whoever has specific
And Ray
knowledge.
Lutz, Harvey, because Ray has invented a computer program that could go ahead and count these images. And Ray has an outstanding little program that, you know, people need to know how it works.
Okay, that's great. Wonderful. We'll do that next week. That'll be the first thing on the agenda is we'll talk about the ballot imaging and I'll write an article about it and we'll have a guide, okay?
And just one thing, since you got me, is that I posted on the blog that we filed for a congressional investigation last Friday. A couple of great lawyers wrote it up who've been watching us go from state to state. We've identified a pattern. I'll say who it is. It's ES&S. You know, as far as I'm concerned, their business practices, when you talk about lobbyists, what they do is hucksterism on scale.
Well, excellent, excellent. And I just got a great email. My grandchildren are coming over to the house after the call. Bob Fitrakis, you have freepress.org. Now, freepress.org, we have Steve Caruso, who is willing to accept any article that you want on the internet. So Bob is the publisher and editor of freepress.org. Steve is the IT guy, and we'll post his email address. It's actually scaruso, SCARUSO1, the number 1, at columbus.rr.com. And if, you know, unlike scrutineers, we won't be organizing the stuff. It'll just get thrown up in the election protection section of the freepress.org. So that's an automatic. Anybody, you see a piece, you think it should be available to everybody, just throw it at Steve and we'll put it up and there you have it. Now, Bob, you also, can you talk to us a bit? We're not fundraising on this call, but although we could use money just like everybody else, but you get enough fundraising pitches. So, but Bob, you're willing to help local groups who get donations. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, we serve to some extent as a clearinghouse for a variety of groups that are nonprofit, are either chartered or non-chartered, but don't have an IRS determination letter as a 501c3. So even individuals, we've done that with. For example, Op-Ed News is under the umbrella of the Columbus Institute for Contemporary Journalism, which, by the way, has been functioning since 1986. We're a long-standing nonprofit. Our main areas are media, but particularly reporting on election protection. So if anybody needs to get nonprofit 501c3 donations, you can get a hold of us and we can act as your fiscal agent. So Harvey wanted me to bring that up. We've worked with other groups, you know, like Audit Arizona, Audit USA, that then went on to be their own entities. So keep that in mind.
Right, and keep the Free Press in mind. Bob is our senior advisor here on this call, and along with Jennifer and Joel Siegel and me and Paul Zeitz. And Bob, what's also in Ohio, you're going to be, you'll probably do the next Zoom call after North Carolina. What's the latest in Ohio? There's still tons of votes from the primary.
Well, they haven't counted 13.8% of the vote. So by state law, they can't count it within the first 10 days, the provisionals and the absentees that came in and you know, questionably late. So 13.8% of all votes have not been counted in Ohio, and in 2 days it will be 30 days after the election. There are some interesting analysis. For example, the Franklin County, the largest county, here in the capital, Columbus, 17.3% of all ballots, provisionals, and absentees are uncounted. 17.3%. So the major urban counties, Lucas County is Toledo, 14.5. Cuyahoga is Cleveland, 14.5. Another thing we ought to consider, there's some abnormally high turnout. The voting turnout was only 22.65% of the vote because everyone was on their own and had to figure out how to apply for an absentee ballot during a pandemic. But in certain rural counties, Morgan and Noble, that vote Republican, the voter turnouts were 43 and 40%. So anytime you're starting to see rural areas with vote count twice the state average and incredibly low voter turnouts, 19% in Franklin County, for example, we should be concerned.
Yeah.
So,
At least they have a sense of humor.
so we're still waiting for 13.8% of the vote, disproportionately 17.3% in Franklin County to be counted from the primary, which has been called by the mainstream media with the unofficial totals minus the 17.3% in Franklin County and 13.8% of the total vote cast in the state.
Hi, can
Well,
I,
at least it's not like Gahanna in 2004 where the turnout was 125%.
Well, and you remember Bush got 638% of the vote officially. Unofficially, it was well over 3,000 votes. That was the loaves and fishes. They left the machine out for a month, and apparently someone helped themselves and created a miracle.
So,
can
I mean,
I ask a follow-up question, Bob?
real quick, Art. Yeah.
Yeah, have you or Harvey, because I didn't see it on Free Press, done an after Ohio vote article where you discuss what actually happened? Because Bob told me via personal interview some anecdotal examples of large crowds in parking lots waiting to hand over ballots and stuff like that. Have you, either of you, written anything or blogged anything about what happened in the Ohio election? Because I didn't see it at the Free Press, just asking.
We're waiting. I was waiting for the official totals. I'm working on a piece with Harvey. It's called Ohio, a Failed State. The thesis is that by any standard, if Ohio was outside the United States, we would be certified as a failed state because of the nature of the way the vote went. And a lot of it is, Ohio law. The fact that you can only have one outlet in a pandemic for people to drop off votes, whether you've got 10,000 people in a county like Vinton County or 1.25 million like Franklin County. Of course, you're going to get a back out and have to call out the police when you've got people trying to vote, at least vote provisionally, or people that were sent the wrong party's ballot, which was a repeated problem. That's why many people rushed to the polls on election day in their cars to try to exchange a ballot, because many of them lifelong Democrats and Bernie supporters were sent accidentally Republican ballots.
Right. They should have just wrote in Bernie on the Republican ticket there.
At this point, prior to your article, is there a website or someplace that aggregates some of these incidents that I could link to in my writing? And in addition to my quoting you, is there, and also Steve and others may want to link to some aggregation of incidents or news accounts about problems in the Ohio voting outside of random Googling.
Bob and I have been writing about Ohio since 2004.
No. I'm talking about
the problem is so much comes out that it's unbelievable that it takes time.
I just meant in terms of this last primary.
Yeah, I understand.
I shared some of those with Steve. We've got some call-ins. We set up an election hotline at the Free Press. Those will be in the article, but again, they followed certain patterns. And the patterns are, of course, you show up and, suddenly you're not on the electronic voting polls, or you
Okay.
get the wrong ballots. So there's a certain pattern to the problems with vote by mail, which, were all made worse by the fact that there were no local places to go and vote, and there were no local drop-off boxes. They were
Right.
all at the same Board of Elections Center, which is an old Kohl's department store on a rundown sort of strip mall area in the outskirts of the county.
Right.
So there you go. And
Okay.
Bob and I will write this up. And,
Okay.
it's, Bob, quick question, which was less organized, Ohio in 2020 or El Salvador in 1989?
El Salvador, once the death squads were properly monitored, but again, I see those people down at the State House, the 3% militia. We've got tons of protests constantly with armed militias in Ohio. It's just become a regular, event. And they're going after the Republican governor, Mike DeWine, because he keeps listening to this doctor who's the health director for the state.
Right. And yeah, there are a lot of problems with vote by mail here, but as Kenny Bruno points out, we are stuck with it this time around, like it or not. And like I like to quote Winston Churchill, what he said about democracy, it's the worst system of voting ever invented, except for all the other ones. And we're hoping that the transition.
But a lot of it, Ohio and other states will be determined by whether or not people are sent a ballot.
Bob, you're breaking up.
Part of the process, every registered voter gets a ballot, or whether which did neither of those. Everyone had to find out how to get their own ballot. And if that happens, there's no way in hell the Democrats have a level playing field in the state of Ohio. Even though the
question I
polls
want
are
to
split
ask
even.
here, I want to ask of you, and Steve Rosenfeld, you're with us, if you can unmute. If you have applied for a ballot in Ohio for the primary, and you get the ballot and whatever happens, happens, do you have to again apply for a ballot in the fall? In other words, are you going to have to reapply for your
There is
regular
no
ballot?
law. There is no law yet in Ohio. The voting rights activist says everyone who's registered to vote should get a ballot. The gerrymandered state legislature is not going to allow that. They're probably going to push that everyone has to go online, whether you have a computer or not, and ask for your own, your own application, fill it out to get a ballot. So, there's three options. I mean, are you going to send every registered voter a ballot? Are you going to send everyone an application? Remember, in 2016, they failed to send 1 million ballots, primarily to the urban areas, the Black and minority and poor neighborhoods. During the primary, with this low voter turnout, except in a few of these Republican counties, no one was sent an application or a ballot. It was every person. Again, the only place publicly to get them, other than going to one building in the county, was to go to Kroger's, to go to a grocery store and the service counter.
Was that for the application or for the ballot at Kroger's?
Oh, the application.
Kroger's agreed since they were open to provide, people were putting up little posts. I saw them in my neighborhood on the Near East Side. They have those little libraries. Some people were copying ballot applications and putting them in these little homemade personal libraries in front of their houses.
Steve Rosenfeld, have you got any new? There is one big piece of news, which is a court has overturned the Florida attempt to make people pay all their debts off before they can vote. The judge struck that down. We're talking about 1.5 million voters here, a referendum trying to be overturned by the governor. And in this case, the court has said that's a poll tax, and that they will not be allowed to deny voters who haven't paid certain fees. Now, the state, of course, is going to appeal that to the Supreme Court, I'm sure, and we'll see what the decision will be. Steve Rosenfeld, do you have anything you want to add in terms of breaking news?
Well, to answer a bunch of questions here, it's state by state whether or not the rules that are being instituted for the primaries will be applied to the general. And you just can't generalize. It's just state by state. What made the Ohio primary different from Wisconsin was that provisional ballots were involved, whereas in Wisconsin, they weren't, because it's a same-day registration state. For these folks that are still on the call from North Carolina, who with the Common Cause thing, one of the things that I've been trying to do with my own research and reporting, but also to share with the folks, like with PDA and Emily and others, Bob, is identify what is not in the charts that you get from the traditional election protection organizations that will impede the process. These tend to be administrative decisions. So for example, one of the big things that's missing is the option in many places to register to vote and to request an absentee ballot at the same time. And another version of this is to update your voter registration information and request an absentee ballot or mail out ballot at the same time. So that's a pretty big deal, because that is where there's going to be, people are going to see with these shorter staffs and overwhelmed election administrators and not really changing timelines, the ability, and all these thoughts and fears about purges and this, that, and the other, not having your information accurate and is going to be as big as not being able to get a registration form when it comes to being included or excluded. And that's not widely recognized.
Well, that's one of the reasons, that's one of the reasons we want people inside, is to check and see what kind of approvals are going on and what kind of rejections.
The other thing, Harvey, is that there's Alan Minsky was talking about what are the priority states, and people can talk about the importance of every state differently, and I won't get into that right now. All of these states might matter in some way or another. But I will tell you that in terms of the current litigation environment, what is missing is that nobody on behalf of the Democratic Party has filed a lawsuit that challenges challenges states that won't let you turn in an absentee ballot at a polling place because they say you got to get it back in the mail and the time has run out and you want it to count. And it's my understanding that Ohio, you can't do that. For example, you cannot take an absentee ballot and show up at an in-person site and have them accept it, whereas there are a lot of places where they would. They also haven't been any lawsuits challenging the timelines between election day and certification. And so I know a lot of people on this call are talking about, the fall, but between now and mid to late August, there's going to be something like 45 statewide elections and presidential primaries. And I'm talking to people who say, this is the time to watch what's not going on and flag it and try to fix it for the fall. So I'll just leave it there. So, when these folks in this meeting in North Carolina, if any of you are still on the phone, on this call rather, it's really important to think about the timelines there. I mean, things like these affidavit and witness requirements only increase it. But you have to really look at, like, why are these ballots getting rejected or why are they not getting delivered? And the remedy tends to be more time is needed, because these antiquated laws were not ever written to envision a scenario like what we're now facing. So I'll just leave it there. And yes, of course, in Florida, yeah, there was a super major decision, which was that, the whole felon reenfranchisement thing. So now there's going to be potentially, 1 million people who groups will try to reach out and try to get them registered and enroll and vote. I got to tell you something else, for all the organizers on this call. One of the biggest statistics that is shocking to me in this entire season is the number of mailed out ballots that do not get returned. So everybody who can navigate this registration process and application process does not vote. In Wisconsin, it was almost 10% of the people didn't vote. Nationally, in 2018, it was 25%. So maybe that's a wonderful organizing opportunity, but this is a really big deal, and people they just don't do it, even if they've gone through all the steps. And we're talking really large numbers. So again, this is what is part of the environment that's moving forward, and I think is really worth tracking in whatever way you can. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. And we only have 5 minutes. Another great call. Much appreciated. We'll start next week with the digital balloting images, and the question which Steve raises in terms of the deadlines: how are the votes, the paper ballot votes that come in by mail, going to be counted, and what kind of deadlines are they going to be facing? And we're going to have states all over the country that every state has allowed absentee balloting, but just the 5 states that have been doing it, now California. Nobody else has really faced the volume that's going to come in. And the question is, how are they going to count these ballots, and what kind of deadlines are they looking at? If you're expecting a big state like North Carolina or Ohio or Michigan to be able to count all the votes that come in by mail in a week or whatever their deadlines are, it's completely unrealistic. And we saw in the last election in Florida that the deadlines actually determined the outcome, because they couldn't do the vote counting, the recounting in time, and all these votes were just flat out excluded, putting in the governor and the senator who probably didn't really win their elections. And so, and Steve points out, there is these lawsuits have to be filed now. The big difference I think that we see in 2020 versus 2016 is that the mainstream media, the New York Times, the Post, the California papers, they're all taking this seriously. In 2016, Bob and I and Steve and Bev Harris and Greg, all of us were marginalized. And nobody, even as late as November 2016, nobody was taking us seriously, to the point that the Clinton campaign wouldn't even participate in recounts in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And that's not going to happen this time. And so we're here, and I'm getting solicitations every day from groups I never heard of. If you want to forward to me any solicitations you get from groups that say they're working on election protection, I will invite them on, and we can see who they are and get them to explain what they're doing. Like I said, I just got one from Move On today. I'll follow them up, and as Alan talked about PDA, we can talk about these others. Okay, we have 3 minutes. Does anyone else have a question they want to ask or a point they want to raise? Dorothy Reich, you raised your hand. I can see you. Dr. Paul, can you liberate Dorothy's mic here?
I just wonder, isn't this lawsuit allowing the felons to vote without paying their fines, this poll tax, this turning over this poll tax, isn't that a game changer in Florida? I don't understand.
If their votes, if they can actually get ballots and get their ballots counted, it could be. I assume.
Harvey, here. Hey, let me just give you some numbers about this, Dorothy. So check this out. Most of the focus has been, and you see this in the Washington Post, the Monkey Cage columns, which does election technology and statistics. They look at the rejection rate of absentee ballots. So Georgia, 2018, it was about 3%. Florida in 2018, it was 1.2%. Now, 1.2% of nearly 8 million votes is a number approaching 100,000. Now, this is rejected because the signatures didn't match, or something wasn't, it got in too late, the postmark was wrong. There's like a whole bunch of reasons. These are really big numbers. And, so the University of Florida, they had these election statisticians. They just wrote a paper that was in mid-April. It was talked about last week, they're projecting double that rate for the fall because it's a state where 25% of the people voted by mail in 2018. They're expecting that will double. And so when you talk about like, you know, the felons and all that sort of stuff, yeah, you know, it's sort of like, what's the baseline here? You know, a lot of times, a lot of voter registration groups say, oh, we registered 200,000 people, but they don't realize that you have to start at minus 400,000 to get a net. And this is and so this is really, when you talk about this, you know, the other thing about this is motor vehicle departments, you know, these social welfare agencies that's supposed to do voter registration, they've all been closed. And if you add a pile of voter registration that's not done online to people at the last minute, they're not going to get into the system in time. So, and then of course it becomes this whole, you know, turnout game. And then of course you have this besides this rate of rejections, you just have this rate of non-returns, which is really, you know,
that has to be looked into. We really have to.
So all of this is to say, it's not a slam dunk by any stretch. And you know, I don't like being the bearer of cynical news. That's not my personality, but that's just reality.
Right.
Aren't there over a
So
million?
if you're,
Aren't there over 1 million?
Yes.
yeah, it's close to 1.5 million. But as Steve points out, and then also you have to remember that Florida has this insane deadline for reporting. And so, you know, we know that the urban counties will be the last to report, and they can get cut off again like they did last time. So we're at 3:30. This was a fantastic call again. Much appreciated to everybody. We will start up next week precisely where we've left off. We'll talk about Florida, and we'll talk about especially the vote counting machines, the ballot imaging machines. John Brakey and Emily will be involved. And if you have any groups
And Ray Lutz.
worth hearing from, please let me know, and we'll include them.
Can
Okay?
we address Republican countermeasures next time? Let's take
Yes,
a look
of
at what
course.
the Republicans are going to do to counter our
Yes,
efforts.
but we're nonpartisan, so we're gonna include both, and we're gonna see if Tom Perez,
countermeasures.
yes, okay, and well, you please send me a memo on what you want to talk about, and I'll deal with that, okay?
Right.
And
Right.
then we'll also see if Tom Perez is actually awake. I'm not convinced, but at any rate, thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Paul, Bob Fitrakis, Emily, Alan Minsky, Jennifer, Steve, all you folks. And we'll next week will be Monday, not Tuesday. Okay, same time, Monday next week. And we also want to talk about doing a national Zoom call with Facebook, which we haven't done before, and we'll get to discussing that as well. Okay, thank you, everybody. See you in a week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Dr. Paul. And have a good one, everybody. Keep in touch.